That's why it's costing 20 or 30% more. It's because all of the taxes that Joe Biden's already raised. And what is his answer to maxing out the nation's credit card? He wants more taxes. Well, the message we have for President Biden is there will be no more taxes. It's the spending in Washington that's the problem, and it's the spending in Washington that we have to address to solve this situation we're in with the debt ceiling. That's why we passed a bill to do it. We passed a bill, the Senate won't even come in to go to work, let alone try to pass their own bill. It's time for President Biden to get serious, bring real ideas to the table, or just say, Speaker McCarthy, the House passed a bill, President Biden ought to support it. And then that bill can get signed into law, and then this whole crisis he's trying to create is over. With that, we'll take some questions. Yeah.
Thank you, Majority Leader Solis. A couple of questions, one for any one of you, and then the second one is for Congressman Miller. First one is, does anyone think the Federal Reserve has played a role in facilitating the current inflationary environment since the beginning of the pandemic? And then for Congressman Miller, what is your reaction to reports that progressives have been pressuring the Biden administration to dump the International Holocaust Remembrance Alliance, or IRA, definition of anti-Semitism? What is your reaction to a Jewish Insider report that the latest draft of the administration's strategy to combat anti-Semitism references the IRA definition in addition to the Nexus definition, the latter of which is supported by progressives?
Well, bring up Max on the Treasury, on Janet Yellen. Look, she's the one who said that inflation was transitory. They have missed the mark every single time on understanding what was happening in the economy and all the devastation that the spending Joe Biden did in his first 2 years in office were causing. And they were late to react on interest rates, and so they ended up having to overreact and raise rates even higher and higher, creating a banking crisis. So crisis after crisis has been created by their lack of understanding of the fundamental basics of what's happening in this economy, and their answer is to try to double down and do more damage.
I'm talking about the Fed specifically, not the Treasury Department.
Yeah, but the Fed was late in addressing interest rates. Every economist will tell you when you have inflation rising out of control, interest rates ultimately have to tame inflation, and they waited so long that they ended up having to jack up interest rates a lot higher than they should be right now, and they still haven't gotten control of inflation because Joe Biden won't get control over spending. That's what the debt ceiling negotiation is all about.
And for your question, and I am aware of it, it's absolutely troubling. And there's one party, in my opinion, that has always stood by Israel, and that is the Republican Party, where I believe that more than 90% of our conference are Zionists. And if you look at the political influence that this administration has had over Israel and with their judicial reform, that's for Israel to work out, not for the United States to enter into hand. But we see this time and time again that this administration and these individuals and our colleagues on the left like to change definitions to fit their narrative. That's exactly what they're doing. And I was just in Israel a couple of weeks ago with Speaker McCarthy. And when we went there, you're able to see the dichotomy between where they are and where we are here in America and our views on them. It is extremely troubling that this administration is not as supportive of Israel as what we've seen. And this is just more of the same tack by President Biden and this administration to hammer on the biggest ally that we have in the Middle East, which is Israel. So, thank you.
Thank you. I wanted to ask you, so a lot of your Freedom Caucus members still don't believe that June 1st deadline is the actual hard deadline for a default that Janet Yellen has provided. One, do you believe in that deadline? What do you think of your members' skepticism about it? And then two, I just want to ask, do you think she should testify before Congress?
Well, we'd like to see more transparency on how they come to that date, but Janet Yellen herself actually left the door open to delaying that in her tweets yesterday. The comments that she sent out yesterday implied that it's June 1st or later, giving some openness to the idea that June 1st may not be the so-called X date. So, haven't really been able to see a lot of transparency, but it looks like they're hedging now and opening up the door to move that date back.
Last question.
If Secretary Yellen or the executive branch needs to prioritize what gets paid, does Congress have a say in that, or is that within the power of the executive branch to say federal workers don't get paid, Social Security checks don't go out? How does that work in your view?
Well, first of all, the real solution would be to pass the bill that the House passed. I don't know what methods they have. It seems like she's indicated they've looked at some different options. Like to hear what she has to say about that. All I know is we passed a bill to resolve this. No one in the Senate has moved to try to pass legislation. Again, if they've got a different approach, Chuck Schumer's really good at trying to criticize other people's ideas. I've yet to see Chuck Schumer's idea that can pass his chamber. We came up with ideas. We actually not only talked about them, we put them on paper, and then we put the votes on the board to pass them. And no other chamber's done that. The president, while criticizing the only plan that's passed, hasn't put anything on the table serious himself that could even pass the United States Senate. We'll do one more, yeah.
Do you think that the debt limit is still a constructive mechanism for shaping American fiscal policy?
Well, at some point, you've got to have a limit on how much the federal government can borrow. We want to get back to balanced federal budgets. And again, we've been there just at the beginning of this century. You know, it was 2001, we were balancing budgets. We need to get back to that point. And the only way you do it, I mean, the real problem is today the federal government's still taking in money, in many ways record amounts. Problem is it's spending too much, spending more than it takes in. For every $100 that the government takes in, it's spending $129. No business could be run that way. No family runs themselves that way. What we're trying to do is say, let's address the debt ceiling, but let's also address the extra $29 out of the 100 that's coming in that we're spending that we don't have, and get it back to a balanced budget. We're working out a plan for over time to do it. The president doesn't even want to engage in that conversation. That has to.
Is the debt limit the best way to do that, or does it?
Well, there's got to be some mechanism to tell Washington that you can't keep printing money that you don't have, because ultimately it's future generations that pay this. It's just like President Biden's idea to just wave the magic wand and say nobody has to pay their student loans back. Every taxpayer in America is going to pay $3,500 per taxpayer for the 13% of Americans who would not have to pay their student loans back. Is that fair that somebody working two jobs is going to have to pay $3,500 so that somebody else doesn't have to pay a loan that they signed for? At some point in time, somebody's got to pay these bills. And Washington can't keep spending money it doesn't have. And so we're at the table saying we've got to get control over spending. We rebaselined the pre-COVID spending numbers, which is very reasonable. That was in our plan that we passed. We also included growth provisions to grow the economy, to get more people work requirements. Think about this. Again, Joe Biden voted for work requirements when he was a senator. That would say instead of spending $140 billion to pay able-bodied adults with no dependents to sit at home, how about you get them back into the workforce? Then they'd be paying into Social Security. That would actually strengthen Social Security. Joe Biden has undermined programs like Social Security by borrowing money from China to pay people to sit at home who are fully able-bodied. Those are basic reforms, again, that any family would do if they were managing their budget. It's time that Washington starts confronting the realities of out-of-control spending. Thank you.
Thank you.